Anita, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Roll call. Councilmember Harris,
Here.
Councilmember Jeruso,
Here.
Councilmember King, Councilmember Green,
Here.
Councilmember Thomas. We have a quorum.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Monday, July 24th, and it is the 8th Quality of Life Committee meeting for 2023. Today's meeting will focus on ordinances and initiatives to improve the conditions in and around homeless encampments. The current conditions pose health and safety risks to residents and businesses across district boundaries. And since the beginning of the term, I've been working diligently to address the homelessness crisis. I've been promoting affordable housing and regularly meeting with advocacy groups and nonprofits. I've also created the position of Director Homelessness Services and Strategy and helped hire Nate Fields, who is here with us today and who will be speaking later on. I also secured a city contract with Clutch Consulting, a national expert on eradicating homelessness and decommissioning encampments. We all know sitting here today that this crisis will not be solved overnight, but I am committed to making sustained progress and continuing my work with advocates, businesses, residents, and my colleagues on the council. I want to make sure that we improve the quality of life for residences and businesses, not only in District B, but citywide. And the bottom line, as the advocates will tell you, we need more affordable housing units. We need people to be able to stay in their homes, and that's something that we'll talk about tomorrow with the assessor's office. We also need better quality low-income units and more protections for renters. And we also need more of an assortment of housing options, including shared models that allow people to progress from living on the streets to having independent, permanent housing. As we are advancing on that work, we need to reduce harm in our encampments. And that's what we're focused here on today. But first, I do want to take this a little bit out of order so we can get Joe Threat and Sarah Porteous out of here. So let's take number 7 first. Anita, and just a reminder to everybody who's here today, we will take public comments. We have a lot of public comment online, but just a reminder, public comment is limited to 2 minutes. And I know that this is a fraught situation and that people can get emotional about housing, but I will limit you to 2 minutes. All right. All right. With that, can we go ahead and get to number 7, Anita?
This is regarding ordinance calendar number 34,277. It's an ordinance to amend and reordain chapter 130 of the code by amending section 130.39 to provide for restrictions on payments to sellers of non-ferrous materials.
Okay, Joe and Sarah, will you introduce yourselves?
Hey, good afternoon, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember Jeruso, Councilmember Green. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you, yourself and Councilmember Thomas for giving us an enforcement tool for the secondary salvage, the sale of secondary salvage. On my recent field visits, you know, it's been a major problem for my group, the infrastructure group, because it becomes a public safety hazard when there's theft of manhole covers, theft of catch basin covers, cutting down of street lights, cutting into traffic lights, taking the fuses for sale. So I basically came to the council to get some support to put some more teeth in the ordinance to kind of prevent this behavior. On the second part of that, and I know a lot of the unhoused community, you know, this is a way for them to make money. I'm working with the Office of Community Development, Code Enforcement, to provide other means to make funds, you know, whether it's picking up tires, helping us with the city with graffiti, helping us to cut unattained lots. So we're working a dual effort, but I appreciate the opportunity to get a new enforcement tools out there now also. And I think with your office, Councilmember Harris, work with some of these salvage yards to prevent this type of activity.
Yeah, Joe, I think the point is, and how this came to my attention was the theft of $300,000 worth of metal basically that was then turned into one of the local salvage yards within the district. So Joe, I thank you for this. I do have a couple questions. How often are you finding basin covers and other city-owned property at these salvage yards?
Can I have
Yeah.
a few slides that I wanted to go through just
Oh, yeah.
to set the tone. And good afternoon, I'm Sarah McLaughlin, Acting Director for the Department of Public Works. And as Joe said, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you and Councilmember Thomas and others on this important piece of legislation. As Joe shared, theft of our city assets is an ongoing issue, not just for Public Works, but for some of our other infrastructure departments, including Parks and Parkways. So I have some slides. I think photos tell the story better than anything else. So just to kind of give you a sense of what we're dealing with around the city.
Thanks, Sarah.
So this first slide shows some of our public spaces. And just last week, Parks and Parkways was doing some routine inspections at some of their public spaces, and staff discovered the theft of various plaques. It's Mississippi River Heritage Parks. There were 4 plaques that had been taken. At the Cancer Survivors Plaza, there were about 30 plaques that had been taken. At Sophie Wright Triangle, 1 plaque, and then at AP Churro Memorial Monument, about 6 to 7 plaques. So it's pretty significant. Obviously, it's going to take a large amount of time and money to be able to replace this, and this does affect the aesthetics of our public spaces. So definitely an issue for Parks and Parkways. And then the next slide, this is an issue that I've talked with this council before about. What you're seeing here is theft of entire streetlight poles. These are pictures in the Michoud area. So, you know, obviously we've always dealt with theft of copper related to streetlights, but now, you know, they're elevating to actually cutting and taking entire poles, which obviously is a really challenging issue. Just this morning, I heard from our streetlight monitor that a pole had been knocked down over the weekend during an accident, which is a common occurrence at North Claiborne and Andrew. And by the time they got there, the pole had been taken. This was a 35-foot pole and arm. And just within 45 minutes, it had been taken. The next slide shows some wiring that was cut and taken in the area of the high rise. Obviously, this is significant damage that's affecting a lot of lights in this area. Extensive work is going to be needed to get the works operational. And then you're also seeing a picture of a fuse box where all of the fuses were taken in the St. Bernard area. Those fuses have since been replaced. But, you know, this is an ongoing issue. And then the next slide, this is an issue which we are unfortunately all too familiar with, where we see missing catch basin covers. It's not always theft. Sometimes they break, sometimes entire frames break. You know, we definitely anticipate that that's going to happen, but we're seeing more and more instances where the catch basin lids are just taken. And actually the map that you're seeing on the right on Triku shows the circles show 4 rollover catch basins that were taken. They have since been replaced, but obviously it's a public safety issue, as Joe mentioned, when you've got open catch basins. So this is definitely an issue we need to get on top of. And then this is a picture because I wanted to sort of give a sense of the kind of thing we're dealing with. This particular vehicle, this photo was sent to me by our streetlight monitor. Unfortunately, by the time I got the photo, you know, there wasn't anything we could do about this truck. But what you see in here are old streetlight poles. And if you look closely, there's actually a rollover catch basin. So this is something that's happening, rollover catch basin lids. This is something that's just happening all too frequently in our community and something we really need to get a handle on. So obviously this legislation is really important, but I did want to just take a moment to mention some of what we're doing internally to try to address this, at least with catch basins. So we started a pilot actually several years back using lockable catch basin lids, and we have seen some success. It was a successful pilot. So what you're seeing here is a picture of a lockable catch basin lid and then a lockable rollover catch basin. And we are in the process of finalizing a contract that's going to give us about 75 of these lockable catch basin lids that we're able to deploy in areas where we're seeing, you know, frequent and routine theft of these catch basins. So it's one measure that we can take as a city to try to prevent this from happening. So those are all the pictures that I wanted to show. And again, we're happy to work with you on this.
Great. No, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Joe. Have you all made an assessment of the amount of money that the city loses because of theft?
I don't have a dollar figure, but it's definitely something I could look into, but it's easily in the tens of thousands. Okay.
And are you actually recovering any of these items from scrap yards, Joe? I know that you and I have a visit coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did.
We did, yes. As you know, for Uptown Recycling, that's definitely one of them. We're not receiving routine calls from these scrap metal facilities, which is something we hope this will help to facilitate. And, we're looking forward to that.
Great. Are there any comments on this by any of the council members? Councilmember Green?
I'd just like to thank you all for your work. I don't actually have a question, but a comment. It's amazing how much theft cost us in the city of New Orleans. It's amazing also that some of the scrap yards have been taking items that you clearly know have to have been stolen unless you have a receipt from the city saying that a catch basin is something that we want to have disposed of. So I'd like to send a message to the scrap yards, do business, but also do business keeping in mind that we are losing as a city more than tens of thousands of dollars, because I can tell you, I can go down Owens Boulevard and Gentilly, and there are catch basins that have just simply been pulled up. They're easy to do it. You would hope that people wouldn't do it. So the message is that it's cost us a lot. I hope that the scrap metal yards will keep that in mind. But I will also tell you something else that's out there. They're saying take it to Mississippi. And that's a problem. They are sophisticated thieves. They've cost our city tremendously. And we're going to have to get to the point where we maybe communicate even outside of New Orleans and ask people not to take the things that they know look like a certain picture that you might send them. Yes, that's the message now. Go outside of New Orleans to get rid of it. Go outside of Louisiana to get rid of it. We got to address it. I don't have necessarily a solution in the long run, except obviously punishment when people are caught doing that. They're not stealing that to get food. They're not stealing that for any purpose other than to make money at the end of the day. But the bottom line is that I hope that we'll look beyond even New Orleans to see where some of these items are going.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Councilmember Green, because more concerning is the public safety aspect of it. Because when you remove a catch basin cover and a manhole cover within the city with our visitor population that comes to visit, it's a hazard. Someone could get hurt really bad.
First of all, thank you guys. As I drive around major parts of Ninth Ward, New Orleans East, in the Lower Ninth Ward, we see whole light stanchions where the wire have been pulled out from top to bottom. One of the most dangerous things that I've seen driving home at night is to see people traverse the interstate to get to these light stanchions to pull the wire out, endangering their lives and the lives of others. And of course, I tell folk, if you've been around, the last time I saw this kind of frenzy with, especially in this country, with metal, was during the height of the crack days. Where I don't know, maybe people have forgotten those days. We seem to forget so much in the city. But where anything anybody had that they could trade in, or that they could turn in, or when my mother would go in her garage, time and time again, and her stuff would be gone. Or someone who wanted metal or wanted a lawnmower or wanted that aluminum rake would threaten her lives just to take it so they could turn it in. There are a lot of things we do, and I'm going to use this as my closing comment on the other issue. I had surgery, I have therapy today, so I'm not going to be here for this great discussion here. But, Matthew 25:35 is self-explanatory. The other scriptures that talk about respect, 1 Peter 2:17 show respect to everyone, especially if you come from a family of believers. But I see in this community, like either you got to be one way or the other way. We're going to deal with another issue when I'm at my therapy that's really sensitive, Nate, real heightened issue. And ultimately, what I've seen from when I was here before and this time again, how people talk to each other and how they communicate with each other is also going to determine how they work with each other and live with each other. There was an issue in the late, I don't know so much that I can tell other people how they feel and think. God ain't anointed me with that. Hopefully he never will. But there has to be a certain level of where do we get to a solution with our discussions in this community from how we do Matthew 25:35 and how we do 1 Peter 2:17. Because if we can't do that, I've done 7 mediations with beef mediators with kids who were talking about killing each other. And don't think they don't remind me how we beef. Don't think they don't remind me how we disrespect each other. Don't think they don't remind me how we talk to each other. So that may be good for the person who's beating their chest or shining their halo. I don't have no halo to shine. I done made enough mistakes. I just pray to God and thank God that he's forgiven me every day. I'm not no better. I'm not no less a sinner than anyone else. But today's discussion, hopefully, will bring us to a point. I was talking to two of my friends as I was walking in. So I'm sorry, Mr. Adams and my other partner, I don't see him here, about this discussion only works if it brings us to a point where we can come up with solutions. Not just this one, but the discussion that's going to happen after this. In the late 90s, they talked about the Legacy Project. They talked about the Legacy Project. That never happened. That was supposed to be a point of entry, a place, Mr. Adams, where everybody would meet together, where homeless and people in need would be taken care of. They never came up with the money to do it. So hopefully this discussion has upset his people. And some people, some people gonna want their attention, and I understand that. Some people are angry. I get angry about stuff too. I have to learn to contain it over the years because I know I'm no better than anybody else. But hopefully, Councilmember Harris, with this thing you're leading and what Councilmember Green and myself and King are trying to do, gets us to a place where we'll have some solutions that'll deal with the people who are in need and the people who need to take care of the people who are in need. God bless y'all. Let's have a good talk about it.
Okay, thank you, council member. Any other council members? All right, I have one public comment on this issue. I have one public comment before I move. Marguerite from Habitat for Humanity. And this is only on the scrap metal ordinance. And just a reminder, 2 minutes, and I'll keep you to 2 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me today. And I really appreciate your consideration of this ordinance. I serve as the Executive Director of New Orleans Area Habitat for Humanity. And in this role, our organization builds 20 to 25 homes in any given year. One thing that we have noticed is an alarming uptick in the number of thefts to our construction sites. And just to give you some context of what that means to an organization like ours, if we build 20 houses in a given year, 11 or 12 of them will be completely stripped of all copper at least once before that home can be sold and moved into by a family of modest means. It's incredibly frustrating. There are times when this past year we had to replace everything in the same house 3 separate times. Okay, the cost of each instance like this is north of $10,000. So in any given year, I could build one more house in partnership with a family for what our direct losses are. Not to mention what it does to the families who are waiting for those homes. In many cases, in situations of hardship, they have to be rehoused, they have to extend their leases because, of course, it delays our construction. So I urge you to impose these stricter controls about what can be done with these non-ferrous metals. It will make a huge difference to a great many in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we had several online comments. Why don't we do 5 minutes and then post the rest?
Sure, there are not very many on this item. First comment is from S. Peters, who says the sale of scrap metal is a way of making money for many people. Restricting anyone from doing so will not only damage individuals, but also impact the economy. Some people may become or remain homeless without this income and add to an increasing poverty issue that impacts tourism and the general happiness of all good citizens who do not want to see their neighbors struggling. In states and countries such as Germany, sale of scrap or tin cans is permitted and the streets are combed clean by the homeless population. In such communities, people are able to earn money in a way that avoids crime and benefits the rest of the city. It might be an exciting alternative to consider. Next comment is from Sierra Kozman. I oppose this amendment. Further restrictions to this ordinance would take away the only income some people have and would create more garbage on the streets. Casey Gerard Davis says, To be open and honest with this one, there's so many barriers as it is. I feel like I'm in a cage half the time. I barely know how to help people without possibly breaking some unknown law, ordinance, or rule. I can't even help my sick family member get proper help or get a room number for a friend in a hospital because of HIPAA laws. It's wildly insane how many barriers are preventing us from functioning and doing what needs to be done to help those who need help. After serving breakfast the other day, I saw some individuals dumpster diving outside a new gentrifying luxury apartment complex that was under construction. They were pulling scrap metal out of the dumpster that was parked on the street. There are also some housed individuals throughout the city that hustle and sell scrap metal to afford to pay bills and keep their current living condition. Not everyone knows how to start their own business, and not everyone has ID available to them. Scrap metal junking is one of the easiest and oldest hustles in the book. Too often people throw out washers, dryers, refrigerators, and metal items to the curb. Not everyone calls for a 311 service pickup, nor should we be sending everything to the city dump. I understand that there are people breaking into new builds, abandoned properties, or unsecured buildings and stealing copper from these sites. I think it should be on the onus of the property owner to secure their belongings. If it is city-owned property like the VA or the naval base, then it should be secured and locked or employ someone to guard the property. Please focus on tiny homes, villages, so some of these people don't have to steal to survive. Internet cafes, dormitory style living facilities with mentors and behavioral health on site 24/7. We need to innovate with style, function, form, and affordability. Prices of everything across the board have doubled in the past 2 years. I'm surprised gasoline is not $8 a gallon. The system is pitting us against each other. We formed this nation to get away from overtaxation and hierarchical elite crown control. Divide and conquer, distract, set the narrative. It's the same game we all know too well. We are one. Democracy is for the people, by the people, not against the people competing against each other. The republic is for the free land that you stand upon, where you rest your head peacefully at night in your comfortable bed, if you are so fortunate. Move on to the next comment from Lacey Levin, who says it's your policy that has created these conditions, and now you're trying to punish the same people you have punished to the margins. Shame on you. There is no such excuse. There's no excuse for such cruelty. Shame on you, shame on you, shame on you.
Okay, thanks, Anita. Let's go ahead and, while Council Member Thomas is here, go ahead and take a vote on this one. So this is on the scrap metal ordinance,
Move adoption.
Second.
seconded by Council Member Green. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it passes. Can we also get to number 2, approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Can we move to item number 3?
This is the local homeless conditions panel. Presenters are Nate Beals, the Director of the Office of Homeless Services Strategy, Jennifer Avegno, MD, Director of the New Orleans Health Department, Taylor Dial, the Environmental Health Coordinator of the New Orleans Health Department, Martha Cagle, Executive Director of Unity of Greater New Orleans, Donna Paramore, the Executive Director of Travelers Aid Society of Greater New Orleans, Angela Asaric, Director of the Programs of Travelers Aid Society of Greater New Orleans.
Great, thank you, Anita. Okay, so this is the main issue of today, obviously, why we're all here. And for those, I see some new faces in the room. If you want to speak, you need to fill out a yellow card. So the yellow cards can be found over there, and just indicate the item on which you want to speak. But as we get some chairs pulled up, I just want to go ahead and frame the issue for us today. Again, as I said, for the past 1.5 years, I've been working on the issue of homelessness, along with many of the people who are sitting here today at this panel, but also many who are in the audience, including Kevin Ferguson. I see Davon Butler and some other folks who are in the business community, but also who also run nonprofits and who are concerned about this issue. I specifically wanted to address encampment conditions. And I know from speaking to the folks here at the city and at these nonprofits that the encampment conditions are made worse by the city's inability to maintain them. And so I realize that there are issues that we're going to discuss today about food safety, food handling, but also we know that there's an issue around sanitation, including the conditions of the porta potties, including the lack of trash receptacles in the encampments. And all of this leads to poor conditions in the encampments, not only for the people living in the encampments, but for the businesses that are around the encampments. So that's what I'd like to focus on today. But this esteemed panel will go ahead and sort of set the stage for us. And Dr. Vegno, if you could also touch upon Clutch Consulting, what we expect to get from them and where we are with them. I know they just started July 1st. And so we can't expect the world, but we can talk about what our expectations are in setting those expectations. And can y'all just go down the line and introduce yourselves before we start?
Sure. Jenna Begno, Director, New Orleans Health Department.
Taylor Dials, Environmental Health Coordinator with the New Orleans Health Department.
Nate Fields, Director of Homeless Services.
Martha Cagle, Director of Unity of Greater New Orleans.
Donna Paramore, Executive Director of Travelers Aid.
Angela Ozark, Director of Programs at Travelers Aid.
Y'all want to go ahead and get started?
Sure. Is there a particular order? Did you want?
Y'all can just, let's wing it. Why don't we start with the city and then go to our nonprofits?
Sure. I'm gonna, to start it off, from the health department perspective, we appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about what we do. As is readily apparent to everyone, the complex problem of homelessness is not something that belongs to one individual, one department, one group of experts. It is something that takes all of us working together. So we, from the health department side, we primarily concern ourselves with certain public health aspects of encampments and other aspects of homelessness. Towards that end, we are always trying to understand those conditions better, both in our field work, which happens all the time, as well as speaking to the unhoused, speaking to our shelter providers and understanding what barriers are to providing safer and healthier places for folks to live, whether it's temporary or permanent. So what we had hoped to do here was, again, just sort of go over what the health department does and does not do in the context of the city's approach to homelessness. And so I'm going to turn it over to Taylor, who's going to do that and then give the results of some work that we've been doing the last several months.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vegno. So I guess I would like to start with saying that at the beginning of 2023, we were informed by NOPD that they were no longer going to be able to provide officers for weekly encampment cleanups. So we have since moved to an every other week schedule. We are also limited in our ability to, I guess, in the time frame in which we're able to operate. Our operations can only go from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. That's from the sanitation department. Despite those constraints, we have still conducted 20 public health sanitation operations in 2023. That is going much more over our every other week cleanup schedule. And these operations are purely focused on removing public health hazards from public property. We are not intended to remove individuals from public space. We are not intended to remove personal property from public space. The law is clear on what personal property is. It is anything that could reasonably belong to a person, anything that could have value, and anything that is not currently in a hazardous condition. The ordinance specifies that tents are considered personal property. The only time where we can remove a tent from public space is if it is posing an immediate health hazard. Throughout the course of my just over 2 years of doing this, the only tents we ever remove typically are abandoned, left behind, and are able to be removed. That's something that we do in cooperation with the encampment residents. Like I said, we are not responsible for removing individuals from public property. We are not responsible for getting folks placed into long-term housing. We are there specifically to remove any public health hazard that we can. It is I think there is an idea amongst some members of the community and members of this body that these actions are meant to be punitive. They are not. They are intended solely for the removal of public health hazards to increase the safety and security for the residents living in these areas and also their surrounding community. Every year we go out and ask folks living in these encampments what they think of our operation. We try to get feedback from them to try to improve the operation. And repeatedly, when we have conducted this survey, we have found that individuals are not interested, individuals in encampments are not interested in leaving these spaces to find shelter at our local emergency shelter system. The survey we did in 2021 found 80% of the folks that we surveyed were not interested in that. So the health department then sort of wanted to get to the core of that. What are the barriers that are preventing individuals from seeking that shelter that we know is safer and healthier for folks? We conducted a pretty significant survey over 2022. We interviewed over 200 unhoused residents to get their thoughts and their feedback. And we had some pretty overwhelmingly consistent results. We found barriers along 3 major trends: freedom, freedom, safety, and support, where folks are not able to come and go into these shelters as they please. Individuals do not feel safe or comfortable in these congregate living settings, and also at these shelters, folks are not getting the support that they need. To put numbers on it, in the 2023 pick count, we saw 547 people currently living unsheltered. As of today, I just counted right before we came in, our emergency shelter system has 222 beds available. Now, not everybody qualifies for every single bed that's available, but there's still, pretty significant amount of resources available for folks. But the reality is they are not able to provide for the needs of the individuals who are currently living unsheltered. One of the, I think the biggest improvements that we've seen over the last couple of months is directly in response to the hiring of Director Nathaniel Fields, sitting here next to me, where the low barrier shelter, the one shelter that the city has helped support, has gone from having over 100 beds at the beginning of the year to now is at about 30. That is a significant amount of individuals that have been able to be placed into long-term or been placed into safer, appropriate shelter. All of these things combined require me to emphasize, as Councilmember Harris said at the beginning, that the only long-term solution to the improvement of conditions in encampments is placing these individuals in housing. It is not about getting folks into shelter. It's about getting folks into long-term housing. That is the only way we're going to see conditions improve in these encampment areas. And it has to be the priority for everyone at this table, everyone sitting behind me, and everyone sitting here in this body. That is our core driving focus. We are going to continue to conduct public health sanitation operations. We have one scheduled for this week on Wednesday. I would request that anyone, if you see an encampment area in your neighborhood, please submit a request through 311 that comes directly to me. That allows us to prioritize our response efforts. So please continue to send those in, and we will continue to work on improving conditions as we can, but know that what we are doing is not going to end homelessness. These conditions are not going to change until we find solutions related to long-term housing.
Can you, Taylor and Nate, can you talk a little bit about conditions that you're finding when you do these cleanups? I know, my ordinance deals with items that are electrified, gasoline, other hazardous items. So tell us what the conditions are like, including the rodent situation as well.
Certainly. So I will say and fully acknowledge, most folks in this room could probably, would have identified this as well. Encampment conditions right now are probably the worst that I have ever seen them. There's really no doubt about it. My biggest concern consistently is with fire hazards. So anything that might be flammable, particularly attached to our highway infrastructure, has me extremely concerned. If we get to a point where we have, significant long-term damage to our infrastructure, we're in trouble. So fire is my biggest concern and sort of what I'm looking at first and foremost. The rodent situation, there are a number of encampments that it has really exploded this year. I'm particularly thinking about the encampment area at Chapatulas and Calliope, as well as Aretha Castle Haley and Calliope, where we have really areas that are overrun with rodents. It's a really significant challenge. Fortunately, we have a really good partnership with the Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board. They've been going out and treating these areas pretty regularly, but even they will admit their treatments are not enough. We also, have from a public health perspective, one of our big concerns is sharps debris. Syringes scattered about, those are incredibly dangerous for, again, the residents there and the surrounding community. Those are pretty consistent. Right now, it's me picking those up, trying to do that as safely and responsibly as possible. We have seen our unhoused population increase. Camps are getting larger. It's taking a longer time for us to clean up. What used to take one day is now taking multiple. That's part of why we are, continuing to have a backlog. I've talked to every council member on this this panel about the challenges that we are having with maintaining a regular and consistent schedule. Conditions are challenging, and we are going to continue to try to address them as best as we are able.
Mm-hmm. On top of the fact that we've also been seeing, I have witnessed myself, people dumping in the encampments, driving up at weird hours of the day, dropping off chairs, mattresses, large pieces of furniture instead of taking them to the dumps and using this as a way to get rid of those pieces of furniture. Also, some of these pieces of furniture have bugs, lice, et cetera, in it. As a matter of fact, we had an outbreak that happened in one of the encampments where we had to go and assist the persons helping the encampment with getting combs and stuff through the health department and rags and towels to make sure that they can get the lice taken care of and addressed. So, we see the scrap metal that is, at the encampments. We see the other things that are at the encampments. Not all this stuff that is in the encampments are the individuals that are there. Some of this stuff is being dropped off and then dropped off at large rates. The individuals there have been asking us, can we come past more frequent to pick up and do cleanings within those locations? So in the Chapatulas encampment and the Treme, they have been putting together piles of stuff and putting it on the side so that we can come past, grab those items and continue to clean around the edges of the locations. But we recognize that these encampments have been getting larger and individuals in the encampments have been getting more severe issues happening to their health and their needs within the encampments.
And I guess, can you touch upon the foodborne illnesses that you've experienced and how y'all deal with that as well?
In my time in the health department, we've had two instances where we have, we've only had one where we ever identified one that was suspected of a potential stomach virus outbreak. We work in partnership with the Louisiana Department of Health to do what testing we can. We contact our outreach workers, do outreach ourselves to the affected area to make sure that folks are aware of this and that there are steps that they can take to try to prevent the spread. It's rare, but it doesn't not happen.
And I think finally, before we get to outreach, can you talk about the current conditions of the porta potties, the hand washing stations, and what plans you have to improve those conditions, including trash receptacles? and
Yeah.
other means for mitigation?
Sure, I'm happy to take this one. Since COVID, in select encampments, and those were chosen very carefully, given their location, volume, et cetera, we have had portalets available for use of the unhoused that we had not had before, that are serviced by United Rentals, which is a servicing company. What has happened in the past few months with the portalets is that there has been a growing and significant volume of material other than human waste that are in the portalets. When that happens, when it's a lot of items like shirts, needles, other materials, the trucks have great difficulty and often cannot suction out the portalets, rendering it very difficult. What is needed to accompany these are increased sanitation receptacles so that individuals have an additional place to throw away items that are not human waste and use the portalets for the function they're intended to do so. Getting those receptacles and making sure that those receptacles are secured so that they can't be moved, they can't be taken down the street, or otherwise utilized has unfortunately taken some time. We are also working with our partners here, Travelers Aid, Unity, to figure out a way to increase distribution of toilet paper so that if individuals are maybe using shirts rather than toilet paper, because a lot of times, even though the portalets are stocked with toilet paper, the toilet paper is gone very quickly. Folks are taking the rolls and using them. It is not ideal. We do believe that the existence of portalets strategically placed and serviced daily as they are meant to be done does help contribute to lessening the risk of an infectious disease outbreak. But we have to solve for multiple problems. And it's multiple agencies. We have to have trash receptacles that are secure, that cannot move, for individuals to place things in, continuing to stress the importance of using toilet paper, and continuing to work with the vendor to make sure they are serviced daily. That has been challenging the last few months, and we hope that we have it resolved and it's on its way of being resolved, but I recognize that it's been a problem.
What can we do to help? I know we talked offline about procurement, which seems to be the word of the day or the week or the month. Is there the trash receptacles? Are they getting caught up in the procurement issue? I think Matt Torrey is here somewhere.
I believe, and I talked to Joe this morning, I don't know if Matt's here. There's chain that's needed, specific chain that they're waiting to come in so they can secure them. I don't know the status of that, but hopefully it is in the works.
Okay, Matt is coming up.
Great.
Councilmember Jeruso has a question.
In light of what I keep on hearing from the departments, that apparently movables and goods have $1,000 cap, and that places us $9,000 below the state and what other. I'm going to introduce an ordinance on Thursday to get us in line with everybody else. I'm just exhausted by the fact that we have $1,700 parts, and it's taking us 4 months to get this all done. So I want this to be not just for you all sitting at this table and for Mr. Torrey and for others. We just can't continue to wait. And I mean, we're getting caught up in red tape, and you can't go to a fast food restaurant and get out for $1,000. I don't know how you're going to pay for getting these things that are crucial to the city of New Orleans. So I just want to let everybody know. And I think Councilmember Morales suggested adding a piece to it that sort of tracks what's being purchased. So that way we know what's going on. But I want to get us in line with state law and make sure that all the people at this table and other people aren't getting caught up. So thank you for raising that, Councilmember.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Jeruso. Matt Torrey, do you have any update on status, or how can we help you get these receptacles installed and serviced?
Hey, good afternoon, council members. So we're actually scheduled just to receive the pieces of equipment needed to secure them later today, actually. So you'll start to see some of those roll trash carts secured to the portalets later this week. So it was just, we were waiting on the materials to come in. They're tracking to today. We'll immediately start installing the hardware to actually secure them to the portalets this week.
And how often are they will they be serviced, the trash receptacles?
I mean, we'll monitor them and collect them as needed, right? So we'll check those routes daily if we need to collect them. daily, we will be a garbage truck, but we'll monitor them. We may need to add more receptacles as well.
Okay. Dr. Regno, just on the portalet issue, they are supposed to be serviced every single day.
Correct.
Are they being serviced every single day?
Oftentimes not.
Okay,
And there's no real, we have to work with our vendor to come up with some sort of reporting system so we can better monitor that. Up until this point, we haven't had good communication in that regard.
okay. Well, let us know how we can help you. Nate, anything to add on this point before we get to I know you're on the ground, you see the conditions. I'd also like to hear from Travelers Aid and Unity as well, though, but
No, I mean, I would definitely like to open the floor for Unity and Travelers Aid.
okay,
Madam Chair, may I make a
Yes.
comment?
Yeah.
Sure. I want to thank you, Taylor, because people don't know that when an encampment is being cleaned up, that you are picking up the syringes. And when the encampment is cleaned up at Claiborne Avenue on a regular basis, I don't want to see it happen this way, but I guess it has to happen. You are picking up those syringes, and I want us to get to the point where we can be a little bit more efficient and a little bit more in line with what the environment requires in that regard. Because Taylor, there are 100 syringes sometimes that you have to pick up, and I think the public doesn't know that, but we don't want that to be the case permanently. We want to address that issue. I do want to also state that despite the fact that sanitation does not make it every day to pick up, just like this morning, those who contribute, for example, black bags to those who are unhoused, and those who are in the unhoused community who take the time out to put debris in those bags need to be recognized, because if you put them on the curb at Claiborne Avenue in the 12, 1300 and 1100 blocks, the sanitation department is picking them up. And if you go by there today, unless they picked them up already, it may be not a daily cleaning up of the trash can itself, but it is an almost daily picking up of the debris that is in bags that is on the side. So I do want to recognize members of the encampments community and also sanitation in your work. The city does do some things. It may not be as efficient as everybody wants, but it's not like we're ignoring the problem and the concerns altogether. Thank you for the work that you do in that regard.
Thank you so much. I'm Martha Cagle, the Director of Unity of Greater New Orleans. Unity is a nonprofit organization that leads the homeless continuum of care of organizations that provide housing and services to people experiencing homelessness. And I agree with Taylor that permanent housing is obviously the solution to this. But at the same time, I want to, say that we all recognize that of the two kinds of homelessness, unsheltered homelessness, people living outside or in abandoned buildings or in their cars, versus sheltered homelessness, people living in homeless shelters, that the unsheltered type is far more dangerous for that person. And so I think I want to acknowledge the work that's been done, particularly by Nate, who's really done a terrific job at this, to really increase the utilization of the beds at the low barrier shelter, and also by my colleagues at Travelers Aid, who've really led the charge along with the Unity outreach team to get people off the street into those beds, because that was also an issue, not just that we weren't utilizing all the beds, but that the beds at the low barrier shelter weren't necessarily, when they were being used, they weren't being used necessarily by people on the street, who should be our top priority population for them. So I just really want to acknowledge really the extraordinary work that's happened since you got here, Nate, of really expanding that. And that's a significant improvement, huge improvement already, just from Nate being here a few months. You've made a big difference. So I've been asked to give an overview of where we are with homelessness. And unfortunately, as I think all of you know, New Orleans experienced a 15% increase in homelessness between 2022 and 2023, which is the largest spike in homelessness that we've seen since Hurricane Katrina. I mean, this is really a significant moment for us. A total of 1,390 people were literally homeless during the January 23 point in time count this year. And that translates into 837 of them were living in homeless shelters and 553 were living on the street. These numbers do include Jefferson Parish, but 90% of our population of people experiencing homelessness live in New Orleans. So two factors are responsible for this increase in homelessness. First of all, we have an acute shortage of affordable rental housing, which has been made worse over the past couple years. And that's because of pandemic-driven inflation, coupled with, which is happening across the country, but we have a unique situation here in New Orleans where that has been coupled with damage to apartments during Hurricane Ida, and then the skyrocketing property insurance that landlords have had to pass on to renters. And so we have been particularly hard hit in New Orleans because of that. And for those who may not be aware, there have been numerous studies over the last 25 years, including a very recent one done by the University of California. But all of these studies that have teased out all of the many factors that could be impacting rates of homelessness, all of them have concluded that there's only one factor that really is the significant driver, and that is the extent to which a community has a shortage of affordable rental housing. Not to say that there aren't other factors that don't contribute, mental illness, substance use, domestic violence, but that one factor is far and away the biggest determinant of whether a community has a high rate of affordable housing. And we do not have that. So that is what is really driving our homeless problem. And of course, you know, the drying up of the pandemic resources has played a role, a very significant role. It's very disheartening to see this increase in homelessness. First of all, because it means that so many people are out there suffering, as you know, those of us who are housed cannot imagine. But it's also very disheartening because the community worked so hard during the pandemic to drive homelessness down in the first place. And it's almost as if we've seen all of that evaporate. The only heartening note is that we know that had we not worked so hard, we took over 1,000 people off the street, placed them in hotels, and 80% of them are permanently housed and remain permanently housed. Had we not done that, we would be seeing 1,400 homeless people plus 800 more. So we would really have a significant problem, even worse than we have now, had we not done all that work. The good news, of course, is that our community came together in the past year, and under the leadership of Calvin Johnson, the retired criminal judge, who is also a mental health expert, along with Bill Hines, a lawyer and business leader, and put together a community task force to reduce street homelessness that was able to successfully compete in a federal funding competition and get our community enough resources from the federal government in this competition to permanently house 420 people. And I want to thank you, Councilwoman Harris, and you, Councilman King, and Councilman Giarrusso for serving on that task force, along with Jennifer Vegno and Donna Paramore and many other people in philanthropy, in business, in the healthcare sector, in the social service sector, and of course, the People's Council, which is a group of people who are currently experiencing homelessness or have in the recent past, who informed all the efforts to put this together. And what that group did was put together a really excellent strategic plan for reducing street homelessness, and put together over $14 million worth of commitments from the healthcare community, from the business sector, from the philanthropic sector, to support both healthcare and housing to provide a match and leveraging that really put New Orleans in the position that we were able to secure this highly, highly competitive grant, because the rules of the competition were stacked against us from the get-go. We lost a lot of points because the competition heavily favored communities that have over 1,000 people sleeping on the street, and we only have 553. Of course, that's a terrible, huge number of people sleeping on the street, but it wasn't enough to get all the points that the vast majority of communities that were funded got. And I think what made the difference was having this incredible community-wide task force that put together such an incredible amount of leveraging. We were able to really get a lot of support. And so we expect to receive a signed contract from HUD this fall and begin to be able to implement that grant this fall. And again, that will take 420 people off the street. We currently have 553 living on the street according to the point in time count. So it's not going to end the homelessness of the people who are living there on the street today. And this is really important to keep in mind. It's going to do nothing about the inflow, the influx. And that is the major problem that we have. That's why until we really invest more heavily in affordable housing, I don't see an end in sight. I think this grant is going to do a lot, but we're not going to be able to keep up with the number of people who are newly showing up on the street every day until we really address that affordable housing shortage. And I want to thank the council for appropriating, I believe it was $35 million for affordable housing, but I would urge you to do even more. You know, the legislature is not going to do it. And right now, Congress is not going to do it because politics there are not, you know, conducive. So I think to the extent that you can come up with any more surplus money to spend on this, it will not only help us with the homeless problem and the people who are literally dying out there on the street because of it, but also, you know, we have about 1/4 of our population that is living below the poverty line, and very few of them, you know, only a small portion of them get Hano vouchers. The rest of them are on their own, really suffering. They can't, they're worried about how they're going to pay the rent. They're living in overcrowded situations. They're living in substandard situations just to be able to afford the rent. They're doing without necessities because the rent is just consuming all of their resources. So I just urge you to do more. And the public can really help this effort by supporting the many organizations in town that are working to house the unhoused population, and by donating to the homeless warehouse, which is a project to collect gently used furnishings and gently used household goods so that we don't have to use federal resources for that, and we can plow all the federal resources into the essential work of paying rents and paying for the case management services for these folks. So again, people are really suffering in our community, but if we all work together, we can make things better.
Thank you, Martha. Donna?
Good afternoon. I'm Donna Paramore, Executive Director of Travelers Aid. I do want to say thank you all for allowing us to be here today to be a voice for the homeless community. I feel confident in our ability to be a voice as we have been providing services in New Orleans for 115 years. At our center at 1530 Gravier, we provide meal services, walk-in and call-in crisis and case management services to help people get clothes, hygiene items, food stamps, IDs, Medicaid, and emergency rental assistance. We assist individuals in applying for all forms of housing for which they may be eligible. We have an outreach team of 7 full-time workers and 2 part-time interns who service an area of about 5 square miles south of Claiborne Avenue, from Jackson Avenue uptown to Poland Avenue in the 9th Ward. We have a permanent supportive housing program that currently houses 75 households by paying their rent and providing lifelong supportive case management. And with the expansion funds that Martha spoke of, we'll be serving as many as 140 households this fall. Even with this level of service provision, we are constantly stretching our services to the max. And we are constantly seeing an increase in requests for help as the cost of living increases. On average, in 2023 through the end of June, about 330 unique people have sought assistance from our agency every month by calling in or walking into our building. Some of these individuals have been without housing for years, and some have lost their housing that morning. Increasingly, others are calling and visiting us because they are about to lose their housing due to the rising cost of rent, or because 1 week of missed work or one health setback has put them at risk of eviction and homelessness. And from personal experience, I'll say on December 31st, my brother was involved in a car accident where someone was driving drunk, hit him. The car flipped over. He broke his spine in 4 places. He's now totally disabled. We have been able to help him pay his rent for the last 5 months, but on last week he had to go to eviction court because of a medical situation that he's not allowed to work. So not only do we see this with our clients, we see this with our family members and friends as well. These 330 individuals who walk into our center are largely distinct from the over 245 unique individuals we can see in a month on the streets and in encampments via the work of our outreach team. In both settings, on the streets and in our offices, we are seeing people affected by poverty, disabling conditions, and discrimination. On the streets, we see individuals whose walkers have been stolen or whose wheelchairs are broken. They cannot travel for services, for food, or for healthcare. So we bring case management to them. We bring paramedics into the field with us. We drive them to doctors and other appointments, and also rely on the network of charitable donations that come to the encampment. In our offices, we have seen individuals who are seeking shelter beds, but cannot find options that will let them store their insulin medication in a fridge all day, given most shelters require you to leave during daytime hours. We receive more and more calls every month from mothers and parents with children who are sleeping in cars, outside, or in overcrowded homes that they will soon be kicked out of. Many of these families are working families, but they cannot afford the rent or childcare, let alone both rent and childcare at the same time. We meet people living with mental health conditions whose needs constantly go unmet. Several months ago, a client in our own housing program had his home health aid services cut off. We had fought for months to have these services for him because he previously was not able to eat or bathe on his own due to severe mental health and cognitive limitations, and had been sleeping on the street despite having an apartment to live in. He did extremely well with the home health aid coming daily and surpassed our expectations for his recovery. However, Medicaid decided he was doing so well that he no longer needed the services. Despite our active appeals of their decisions, he lost his ability to care for himself and returned to the streets. Several weeks ago in our outreach program, a woman with whom we had worked for years to house several times was evicted again for making too much noise at her apartment complex. This is due to the symptoms of her cognitive delays and structural brain deficits, neither of which can be solved with psychiatric medications. She has previously done well in group homes, but notably, there are essential 0 fully licensed group homes in the Orleans Parish area, except for those one may be mandated to after a period of incarceration. Many group homes in the city try their best, but they are at best unsupported and underfunded and lack medical staff, and at worst, others are taking advantage of individuals who have no other living options available to them. What all of these stories tell us is that the effects of poverty, discrimination, and the world not designed to support individuals with disabilities are serious and life-threatening. Individuals who sleep outside on an average or die on an average of 2 decades faster than their house counterparts. The solutions to these problems are unchanging. We need deeply affordable housing to be created and preserved. And we need diverse types of affordable housing because some people need support in their homes, and many of the nursing home, groups homes, assisted living facilities available to people living in poverty are not currently funded sufficiently to offer dignified living conditions to these residents. As an agency, we currently pay about $75,000 per month in rent to private landlords. And that number is even greater with all of the agencies that are managed by Unity. I will add that all of these units are not even up to quality conditions, and that if the city invested in building affordable housing, instead those individuals who are living there with subsidies could also generate revenue to build more housing. We need more rental assistance available to individuals of all kinds. We need living wages because there's no way to survive and maintain one's housing on minimum wage or even the double minimum wage in Orleans Parish, given the current cost of living. I will say at Travelers Aid, we see ourselves in the faces of our clients. We have staff members who have lived experience of being homeless or family members being homeless. I know that it can be frustrating when we pass by an encampment, or it can be embarrassing when we have family members in town and we pass an encampment. But honestly, it should cause frustration and it should cause embarrassment that we have human beings living in such conditions.
So I'm Angela. I'm also from Travelers Aid. I'm going to follow up a little bit more with observations from our outreach team about conditions and encampments. I do just want to voice a reminder to anyone who's new in the audience that there is no free for all at the microphone. And if you would like to speak later, you should come get a yellow comment card. Great. Okay. So
Thank you.
I cannot emphasize enough to continue what Donna was sharing, just how much poverty, discrimination, and a lack of access to guaranteed health care disproportionately target people with marginalized identities, and how the adverse life experiences that come out of that intersection compound each other over and over. And all the things that poverty means: low wage, high rent, relying on poor public transportation to get to your low paying job, only having access to education for yourself or your children that is either substandard or across town, and maybe sometimes both. All of those things compound each other over and over. And I'm going to share some data. In the summer of 2021, with the support of some agencies in the French Quarter, we at Travelers Aid conducted a study on folks living unsheltered in the French Quarter. We conducted hour-long qualitative and quantitative interviews with over 135 people sleeping on the streets. And just to paint a picture of the context that not only this conversation about broad strokes, but the specific ordinances we'll talk about today, I just want to make sure we understand some of the things that people who will be most affected by these ordinances are living with. So in our survey, we found that 70% of people living on the streets have at least one disabling condition, and 50% reported having 2 or more. 80% reported having been homeless for at least 2 years of their lives, some for decades, some since childhood. Individuals who had reported that they lived in foster care were represented at 8 times the national average. Individuals who had less than a GED education at 4 times the national average, and multiple people cited that their inability to read and write was keeping them from accessing services like housing, food stamps, and Medicaid because they cannot fill out the forms on their own. People who had experienced any kind of domestic violence were represented at 3 times the national average. People who had been incarcerated in any way at 19 times the national average. Individuals who identified as any part of the LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus community at 4 times the national average. People who identified as Indigenous as 3 times the national average, and our trans and gender non-conforming community members at 15 times the national average. So just wanting to keep in mind that, once again, marginalized experiences, marginalized identities, adverse life experiences are often compounded for these people who are experiencing houselessness and homelessness on our streets. And it's with that context that we need to talk about any action we would take or not take. And importantly, I also wanted to highlight, as Unity's point in time count shows us every year, so did our French Quarter survey. Louisiana is the main place where these people are from, and the majority are from the Gulf South. So just because we often hear about people coming into town, that is not what our team has found. And as Donna shared, notably, we are meeting more and more people over time in their first hours or days of homelessness. In early morning outreach in the French Quarter, I myself have seen people in checkered chef pants and a white chef's coat with their bag on their back, getting ready to wake up and serve tourists in our French Quarter restaurants, sleeping on the sidewalk. Per Martha's comment, there will continue to be a constant inflow among working and insufficiently earning people because wages are so low here and rents are so high into homelessness. I wanted to highlight, just between when we closed on Friday evening and when we opened this morning, I got 5 emails, because emails are forwarded like from the info@Unity email box, and those are just the ones forwarded to our staff for connections about people who are at risk of falling into or have recently fallen into homelessness just this weekend. So this is a constant problem. And I like to believe that addressing all of these intersecting issues is possible. If we pay a living wage, if we create and preserve deeply affordable housing, and if we invest in truly supportive services like healthcare, education, substance use treatment, youth development, and more. And I also recognize at this Quality of Life Committee that these ordinances, however we act on them, are not going to do all of those things, or not today. So I will focus down this conversation about the ordinances. And I will say, as I have already communicated with some council members, when I received some of these ordinances, I was both confused and concerned. I am confused because, like I sent in an email to some council members, our team of 7 full-time and 2 part-time outreach staff and I would not list food safety in our top 5 encampment health and safety issues. People who live in housing near encampments and may walk by encampments may feel that their proximity to any health or safety issues in encampments presents them with a quality of life issue. But I really need to emphasize, for those actually living in an encampment, it is a death or life issue, not a quality of life issue. And health and safety in encampments is important to me. I do believe it's important to the people in this room. So I take the intention of the ordinances at face value, that people are concerned about health and safety. But I will say, as someone who shares that concern, I do not think food hygiene, especially approaching it in a punitive way, is the place to start. Notably, so I'm going to share a combination of things. I'm going to share about things we can do instead, though that's how I'm going to close. But in the meantime, I'm going to share, just because I think it's important, the potential harm we may do by punishing people giving food and constricting the food resources that are already limited for